Microsoft and Nintendo battle over launch numbers. Cell phones make gaming pervasive. And SNK is dead. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industries 40, 30, and 20 years ago. Today we'll be setting the machine back to January of 2002 to find out what was making headlines, and I've already said that. Okay, done with the voice. I'm Carl, your host, and back by popular demand, Mads. Welcome back, Mads.
Thanks for having me, Carl, as always. I'm well chuffed to be on.
Yeah? This is your first 20-year jump, right?
Yes, my first of the short ones.
Oh, short ones, yeah. Well, short as far as time, not short as far as content this time.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Yeah. We've got quite a lineup today, so tell you guys what, we're going to dive straight into all the goodness, just because it is a very, very busy episode. But before we do that, obviously, a couple of notes. Number one, always remember that when we say we're going back 20 years, we're always using the cover dates of magazines and newspapers. So obviously the events always happened at some point before that. It's just a convention. Please don't send me emails about that. And second, you can catch us on all the usual platforms, the Twitters and the Instagrams, and support us on the Patreon to get some exclusive content that is only available there. Mads, you're also on a couple of podcasts. Where can people find you?
They can find me on the Retro Asylum, where I podcast about all things retro, and on the Playthrough podcast, where I do a more like book club long-form podcast where we deep dive into some, more modern or middle-aged games.
Excellent. And all the links are in the show notes below. So, before we can turn on the time machine, first we have to send the intrepid co-host on a mission to play a game that was reviewed in one of the magazines from January 2002, and in a little segment we call 7 Minutes in Heaven. Mads, are you ready to dive in to Typing of the Dead?
I'm ready, mate.
Excellent. Then, go for it. Welcome back, Mads, from your 7 Minutes in Heaven. So, for those who have not played Typing of the Dead, based on your 7 minutes with the game, please describe it to our listeners.
Well, Typing of the Dead is something as crazy as a light gun shooter game where you take away the gun and put in a keyboard instead. So instead of actually having to shoot the monsters, the zombies, the gargoyles, whatever, 3, 4, 5 times, there'll be 3, 4, 5 letter words beneath them. And if you type that word, every single letter will be a shot, and you can dispatch of the enemies that way instead. So it will say, in the boss fight, I remember it said, a handy tote hack, just to mess me up a bit instead of a handy tote bag. So you had to write those half sentences there, and for some smaller enemies, it'll just be an X, an O, and the zombies will be 4, 5 letter words. So it's a typing game, and it's all about reading the words as quickly as you can, understanding what's there on the screen, and then typing it down. And it's strangely addictive, really. I couldn't put it down, so after playing 7 minutes, I played another 7, and actually another 7 after that as well. So this was great fun.
I'm glad you had fun with it. Now, this is using the same assets as House of the Dead 2.
Oh, yeah.
The one set in Venice. So, did you have a lot of experience with that game coming into it?
Yeah, I've played that a lot back in the day in the arcades. I actually haven't played. I played House of the Dead 1 again in recent years, But the second one I probably haven't played in the past 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
I played it a lot in the arcades back in the day. My mates and I loved the light gun games, so House of the Dead was definitely one that we'd go towards if it was there in an arcade. But it's only the first one I've tried again later on the Dreamcast, I believe, or maybe it was even on the Saturn if it was
The Saturn.
there.
Yeah, only the Saturn got a port of House of the Dead 1.
Yeah.
House of the Dead 2 gets ported to the Dreamcast, and then there's a disc with both 2 and 3 for the Wii.
Okay, I think I do have the first one for the Saturn then, because I do have I think it's called the Punisher, the light gun on the Saturn.
Yeah.
I have a few light gun games there, but mainly I actually, playing light gun games these days, I go towards Point Blank on the PlayStation. Don't really know why, but I just love that game.
Oh, Point Blank is amazing.
Yeah.
It's just so much fun, and it doesn't require the whole screen to be constantly moving around and stuff like games like Area 51 or Virtua Cop, House of the Dead, which is a little less. It's a little less disorienting if you're not into that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to get into Point Blank again at some point, actually. I used to be really good at it, but then again, I used to have a 28-inch CRT, so there was a big play field there, but I used to be able to get through it on the hardest level. There's one above Expert, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never put in enough time with it. It's one of the games on my list now that I actually have a light gun set up, but I just haven't had time to play it in the last 6 months since I bought it. So that was going to be one of my goals now during the break between.
But then at least you can play Typing of the Dead, because you don't need a light gun or a CRT for that. You just need your keyboard, and it's
exactly. And we also mentioned, I got to throw this out there because it's awesome. There is a sequel, Typing of the Dead Overkill, which I also highly recommend. There was another Typing of the Dead game, but I believe that was based off of House of the Dead 3, and that's exclusive to Japan. So that never made it out of Japan, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's definitely a game that suggests people just at least try. But as we were talking about on video as well, it doesn't seem to be a game you can buy anywhere these days. I checked out Good Old Games, for example, and I couldn't find it there. So
yeah, I have no idea why. I mean, Sega has done so much to exploit their back catalog. I don't know why this one is a no-show. It's kind of sad.
Yeah. Especially seeing as it actually runs on Windows 10, no problem at all.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, who knows, the mysteries. And as you mentioned, there is a video version, so for our Patreon supporters, you can actually watch Mad's 7 minutes in heaven as we comment on it. So go and support us over there. Link in the show notes below. Okay. One more stop before we turn on the time machine, and that is check in with our good friend Ethan, the warden of the Department of Corrections. Welcome back, Ethan. So, the happy-go-lucky, super fun time version of the Department of Corrections continues, and in the spirit of that, let's start with
the John comment. John seems like a very self-serious man, so when I do the John comment, I must be very self-serious.
Oh, very self-serious.
Mm-hmm.
Not serious about other people, but serious about yourself.
Yes, of course. That's the only way you can get people to recognize you for what you are. For the dashingly handsome fellow that's on the other side of the mic. John, you cannot put in a Department of Correction. I'm here to do the Department of Correction. So, Carl, this goes to you. It's Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park? What?
Yes, it's Jurassic Park.
I don't get it. What is Jurassic Park? He quoted
Jurassic Park, and you're like, oh, that's the movie Hackers. And then he said, no, it's Jurassic Park. But his Department of Correction is illegitimate, so I have to take it.
Okay. I now I remember what we're even talking about. Okay, yeah. So I didn't recognize the quote, and thank you for correcting.
Shame on you. Anyways, next up we have talking about the spirits within. You said the spirit within's problem is that it did things in a movie that you can only do in a video game, and that is not the problem with the spirits within. And in general, Final Fantasy is a very bad, series to try and use to prove the point that the two are different, because they just use giant, massive cutscenes. Now, I mean, in a couple cases, there are some very interesting things that happen in Final Fantasy, like the World of Ruin in Final Fantasy VI, playing as young Cloud and seeing Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII. But in general, they're stapling movie techniques onto game, in between game stuff. So I would not use Final Fantasy as an example of what video games can do in storytelling.
Well, no. I mean, video games can do many, many things in storytelling, but and they can do them extremely well and in ways that other mediums can't. I mean, games like Brothers, for example, just does storytelling in a way that a non-interactive medium never could. But the point I was trying to make was that the pacing of the plot, the depth of the plot, the number of elements that the story was juggling just felt like a video game. It felt like that drawn out, plot that in movie terms would have probably been told in 20 minutes had to get stretched out for no discernible reason other than that's what you're used to doing in a video game.
I don't think it has anything to do with depth. I think the movie is super boring, but anyway.
Well, yeah. I mean, had they tried to tell that story in 20 minutes and made it make at least a little bit of sense, it would have not been a huge dud, but yeah.
And on the same topic, you the barometer that you used for good video game storytelling is BioShock, and I object, sir, for especially BioShock's particular story. The quote-unquote unique things that it did were very more subtly done in a game that was released 3 years earlier. It's called Half-Life 2. I'm not sure if you've...
I have. It does ring a bell. I thought there was a third one. No, I'm just kidding.
You gotta hit me like that, Carl. Oh, you have to... But, yeah, that's just an opinion thing.
Yeah, well,
I've never been a fan of BioShock.
To be honest with you, I couldn't get into BioShock either, but also I couldn't get into Half-Life. I couldn't get into Half-Life for the same reason. So, it's all good.
Next up, which is kind of funny with the flashing news that just happened this morning. But you said you were using examples of companies owned by Microsoft, which is now a lot. But Bioware is not among them. They did not buy EA.
Okay, so now for clarification, because this will be coming out in several weeks, we are recording this on January 18th, and the news has just broken that Microsoft intends to buy Activision. So for those in the future where either the government has stepped in to stop this monopolistic practice, which is highly unlikely, or where this deal fell through for a variety of other possible reasons, we just want to clarify your comment and have that on record. Okay.
But BioWare is not owned by Microsoft yet.
Oh, really? I thought they were bought up by Microsoft. Oh, well.
No, they were bought by Electronic Arts.
That's what it was. Oh, my goodness. Can't keep track who owns what at this point.
It is a full-time job for some people.
This is true.
And next up on your terrible opinions, Mario Kart Double Dash is brilliant, you swine.
It must be what can I say? What would be a good description for it? A codependent psychosis with your unnatural affection for the GameCube controller.
And I could say the same for you, but in reverse. And your justification for if they haven't done it again, then obviously it wasn't a good idea. Then I could say that about many game franchises that you love, sir, and say, wow, they must not have been good if they are not making them anymore. So,
Oh, no. I am perfectly well aware that if they didn't make another one, it's probably because the last one sucked. And so, yes, no, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I accept these things.
I could find. I'm certain I could find something that would absolutely rile you. But anyways, let us get past our anger and our opinions and Mr. Amiga over here being Mr. Amiga. This was not an error, but I just wanted to bring up, since you didn't actually bring up the fact that Scott McCloud, his most famous work is Understanding Comics, which is a very brilliant dissection of the medium.
And art and storytelling as a whole. I know, because
Yes.
I've also read it at least 3 times. So
Yes, and I also have
Amazing.
his follow-up book, Reinventing Comics. They were very influential to me early when I was doing my game design degree. So I just want to give a shout out. If you do not have it in your collection and you're interested in the art of storytelling, absolutely get Understanding Comics.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's a must read. Absolutely brilliant.
And one last thing. You said that Neo Geo started 10 years ago when you were in December 2001, but Neo Geo dates back to 1990, sir.
1990 in Japan or also US release?
Also US.
Cool. Okay. Then
You covered it at the time.
I'm sure I did. I just did not check again which year it was. It's all starting to blend together after 3 years. And I don't even want to imagine.
3 years? Three whole years. Nice.
We've been doing this for more than 3 years now. Actually, November was the 3rd anniversary. We talked about it on the show, but apparently you didn't catch that.
Oh, pish posh. I'm just trying to hype you up, Carl.
I know. Thank you. Yes, 3 glorious years and only 7 left to go. I can't wait.
All right, well,
No.
you have ruined the positivity of the Department of Corrections for the rest of 2022, so you best be ready next time.
Oh, I am ready for the smackdown. So.
And we will leave you with some glorious, glorious sounds of the time machine traveling into the far distant future of 2002.
Look forward to it. Ethan, thank you for your service.
And goodbye to you.
So, Carl, no love for Double Dash? I love that game.
It's a fun Mario Kart game, but if you're playing in single player, the second character that's on the back of the vehicle doesn't really add anything to the gameplay. If you're playing it, in co-op, which is your experience, it's a different ballgame.
Yeah. I mean, that's why you're doing it wrong, because that is a game you need to play with your kids. To just wait a few years till Mina gets a bit older, and then put it on the GameCube or an emulator at that point in time. So it's brilliant. I mean, the kids can just be the ones standing in the back of the car firing shots at the others. And the driving is actually really, really solid in Double Dash. The driving mechanics haven't been bettered until the Switch version. Is that Mario Kart 8, I guess?
Yeah.
For my money, at least. So I loved that game back in the day. So, well, not really back in the day, but when my kids were 5, 6 years old, that was great.
I will have to definitely give that a go, and by the time she's old enough to play, we should be up to, a Raspberry Pi 6? That should be able to do it without a problem, yeah. So.
Yeah, I think so. You just need to grab some good controls in your set.
Oh, definitely. Then again, I might have I'll have to give her a proper controller, not that GameCube thing. And I'm just dissing the GameCube just to piss off Ethan. So, okay.
So I'm one of those weird guys that even though I have huge hands, I kind of like the GameCube controller. But I've got a Wavebird, which is larger than the others, and that's a brilliant controller.
That would be helpful. Avoid those cramps.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Now, it's finally time. Let's turn on the time machine and head back to January of 2002 with a brand new sound effect.
I think this guy's the one for 2002. Demographic harsh.
Welcome to January of 2002. Mads, what's our first story?
Microsoft and Nintendo both claim victory in the dual launch battle.
With both Xbox and GameCube launching in North America within days of one another, both companies claim to have had the better launch, with each choosing their own metrics and ever more specific press releases to top the other's brags. Whether Halo sold more units than Luigi's Mansion, which console had more software sell-through per unit, how many units were sold in the first 5 days, etc. The only real question is, can they beat PlayStation 2?
And the answer is no.
No, not even not even going to get close.
No.
No.
PS2 is still the best-selling console ever, right?
I believe so. I believe it still holds that title.
But yeah, at least not. I mean, for the handhelds, I'm thinking maybe the DS and all of its many iterations together has sold more.
Yeah,
but
the DS.
For the real consoles, the PS2 is, I think that's the best selling, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's still number one. I mean, that thing sold for forever. It had a 10-year lifespan, which is unheard of for a game console, really. Yeah. Maybe with the exception of the NES, but then it didn't have the worldwide penetration that the PS2 did.
Yeah, true.
And I mean, everybody, they're all fighting over it. And a lot of the press at this month is still talking about how, is PS2, the difficulty of programming it is that is still sort of the image of the PS2 at this point.
Yep.
And a lot of people are thinking, well, Xbox is going to be easy to program for. GameCube is going to be maybe easy to program for. It's still kind of a closed box. And we're going to get GTA 3 tested this month. And after that, it doesn't matter what everybody else has. You want GTA 3.
That's going to sell some consoles.
Yeah. There is an interesting side to all of this because Nintendo lowered its licensing fees for the GameCube developers. And so this was probably as a reaction to the fact that the Japanese launch was muted. We talked about that last month on the 20-year jump. And they didn't actually go to Akihabara with lots of numbers. Instead, they were mainly selling through department stores and clearly targeting a younger audience. And so with Pikmin and Smash Brothers DX just launching in Japan around the same time as the US launch, there's finally a little bit of pickup in the GameCube, but it started out really, really slow in Japan. And Nintendo is now hoping that third parties are going to jump on board. So the fact that they're lowering the licensing fees, and we've talked so much on the show, especially in the 30-year jumps in the late 80s, early 90s, how Nintendo, basically was like, you want to play in our park, you got to pay. And the fact that they're now lowering the licensing fees really shows the shift of 10 years later and the relative limited success of the N64, that Nintendo is in a very different position today at this point than they were in 1991 or 92.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So quick personal question here. Halo or Luigi's Mansion? Which one would you go for back in the day?
Oh, Halo. And I'm not an FPS guy, but I remember looking at Luigi's Mansion going, seriously? This is the quote-unquote Mario game you're launching with? Are you out of your mind? This is
so sad. I could agree with you, but then we'd both be wrong. Luigi's Mansion, hands down, it's so good.
I'm not saying it's
brilliant.
A bad game. I'm not saying it's a bad game. Listen, you have to look at it from the point of view of that moment in time.
Yes. At that point in time, I would have laughed at Halo and said, why would I ever want to play that with that horrible controller? Give me a PC and a mouse, keyboard mouse. I'll play Halo. But Luigi's Mansion, on the other hand, that's a console game for me. I played that.
Well, but that was the thing. It wasn't a console game anymore at that point because we had just gone through the 3D revolution. We had played games like Metal Gear Solid on the PlayStation 1. We had played all these three-dimensional games, Spyro, Mario 64, Zelda, and now you're going back to essentially a game that could have been pulled off with 2D sprites. Honestly, Luigi's Mansion did not need to be a 3D rendered, real-time rendered game.
Oh, you're so wrong, mate. You're so wrong. You need to fire up Luigi's Mansion. Luigi's Mansion is one of the most beautiful 3D games that still stands up today, still holds up graphically.
Of course,
today.
Because they don't have to show you the fourth wall. Because it's a fixed perspective.
Yes, true.
So they're basically cheating. I mean, contrast that with GTA 3. Contrast that with GTA 3, where I have the freedom of moving the camera around. Obviously, it's going to have less detail. It has to have less detail.
Yeah, but honestly, I love GTA 3, but it looks like ass compared to Luigi's Mansion.
It looks like ass, but by the same token, it looks like a step backwards. And I'm just saying from the point of view of the time. Remember, it's the same reason why all those early 3D fighting games in 95, 96, when you saw a game like not Soul Calibur, what was it? Toshinde on the PlayStation. Okay. Do you remember seeing Toshinden for the first time?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And up until that point, what had you seen? You had seen Virtual Fighter in the arcades, unshaded polygons. You had seen the 2D games, and suddenly you've got, albeit slow-moving, albeit blocky as hell, but you had 3D fighters who could sidestep in 3D with shaded graphics. We were all blown away. It didn't matter how it played. That was the game you wanted to have.
Yep.
And this is why, if you're looking at Halo with its 4-player split screen, multiplayer, online options, this is the next gen. You're not buying a next gen console on day one to play a game that's really just a 2D side view game. You know what I mean?
I disagree, but I know what you mean. Yeah.
And let's face it, Nintendo always has that level of polish in their design.
Yes.
That meticulous attention to detail in balance that no other developer ever hits with that consistency. And Halo probably doesn't have that level of polish either, despite the fact that it was in development for years by amazing developers.
Again, Halo, looking at that today, that's aged.
Oh, it's aged
it's turned to vinegar and not wine, whereas Luigi's Mansion is still beautiful and it's still playable. Halo is a mess.
Well, but that's the thing. You're not buying a game on day one because it's going to age well. It's because it's going to have a wow factor.
Yeah, true. And of course, Halo had the added benefit of being able to play with friends, which is very important.
Exactly. And that was the big attraction to Halo. I remember people would buy in the Xbox, they never bought a second game. They just played Halo forever.
Yeah.
Until, of course, Halo 2 came out. Maybe then they bought a second game.
Well, I did play Halo back in the day on the PC, as it was meant to be.
Yeah, it was meant to be on the Mac. Let's be clear here.
That's true.
So, but okay, I think we're getting way off topic right now.
Yes. Let's.
I understand what you're saying, and yes, I completely concur. Luigi's Mansion is the much prettier looking game. It just wasn't the more eye-popping game at that moment in time.
No, sounds about right.
Yeah.
So we just posed the question whether the GameCube or the Xbox could beat the PlayStation 2, and probably not. And now the PlayStation 2 has a price drop in Japan.
Sony announced the first PlayStation 2 price drop in Japan. Many had speculated it would come before Christmas, especially in light of the upcoming launches of both the GameCube and Xbox, but Sony held out until after the holiday rush. The new price of 29,800 yen, or $237, a drop of 10,000 yen. Sony has also decided to launch the system in South Korea, where it had previously not been officially available due to a cultural import barrier and high rates of piracy.
So piracy already on the PlayStation 2. Okay.
Well, piracy on the PlayStation 1.
Okay, yeah, because on the PlayStation 1, I definitely remember that it wasn't very many years before we had mod chips and all sorts to just play burnt CD-ROMs. But the PS2, for me at least, it took a while before I even heard about people hacking it. And I never had one myself until like a couple of years ago.
PlayStation 2 could be modded relatively quickly.
Okay.
And remember, it's using DVDs, so making pirated copies of DVDs, while still very expensive at this point, was a concern. Okay. And in South Korea, I mean, this is around the time we've talked about it in the show before, in the 20-year jumps. South Korea is massively obsessed with online games at this point.
Yeah.
For a variety of cultural reasons, but also infrastructure reasons. And so the console thing doesn't seem to have had the same foothold there, but there was also this cultural barrier on the World War II leftover, things from Japan not really wanted. And since most of the consoles would have been coming from Japan, that meant that there was just all these issues. But probably the big motivator for Sony here is that Microsoft has decided to launch in South Korea. And that's probably what's pushing Sony to also try to get in on that market before Microsoft can really take hold, especially because the Xbox does online out of the box.
Yes, the PS2, of course, doesn't.
Exactly. And so this is why Microsoft is already kind of knows what's going on over there because, well, everybody's playing on Windows machines, playing their online games, and they're basically offering a Windows machine with online capabilities in the form of a console. So they're probably seeing the potential, at least, of trying to get into on that market. How successful Xbox was in South Korea, I honestly couldn't tell you. I'd have to really do a deep dive to figure that out. I'm not guessing it was huge, but it is interesting to see that Sony is perceiving Microsoft as a threat, or at least changing their game plan a little bit because of it.
Yeah. And speaking of Microsoft in South Korea, Sony president says Microsoft is the new rival.
Sony president and COO, and I'm going to kill the name, Kunitake Ando, told the Financial Times that Microsoft had replaced Nintendo as its main rival and that it may have to move up the launch of the PS3 to remain competitive.
So already here we see that Sony sees Microsoft as the main competitor. It's something that's been going on and on for years, but why are people overlooking Nintendo, who's just sold, I mean, the Switch has just sold even more consoles than the Wii, for example. Why is this happening for the past 20 years?
Because they're not the same market. They're not the same demographic.
So the core gaming audience is not what the Nintendo is hitting, you think?
No, not at all. I mean, Nintendo is going after a more family-friendly image. Nintendo's going after a more, they're going for this quirky, not as high-tech. I mean, the GameCube hardware is nowhere near what the Xbox or PS2 hardware is in its capabilities. If you compare a Switch with a PS4, it's nothing in comparison.
No, I know about that, but I actually thought, just based on the games I've played, that the GameCube hardware would actually be better than the PS2 because it always seems better, looks better at least, than what the PS2 outputs for me.
Well, and we can talk about the technical aspects of this, but from a pure processing standpoint, the PS2 is going to be pushing more. I mean, think about how many big open world games came out on the GameCube.
True.
Not a lot.
PS2 is definitely the platform for that.
Exactly. And they kept pushing it. I mean, if you look at San Andreas, there's nothing that is pushing that amount of data around. As far as, just go wherever you feel like it and stuff will just be there. If you look at the Zelda game for GameCube, they kind of do a little bit of it, but I mean, it's not, dozens of people walking down the street and, buildings everywhere, and then jump in a car and do the whole thing at high speed. It's one thing to have the town and you can only move at a limited speed through the town, which allows the processor to, grab more data, process it, put it on the screen. Once you're able to, do 120 miles per hour, you have to be pushing that data into the pipeline really fast to keep going. And that's where the PlayStation 2 power differential really shows.
Yeah, could be.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, once they get to the Wii, they're sort of at that level. This is also why, if you look at the overlap period where the PlayStation, after the PlayStation 3 comes out, there's a period of about 2 or 3 years where there's a lot of PlayStation 2 software still coming out, and almost all those games also get direct ports to the Wii. And a great example of this is the Ghostbusters game that comes out around that time. The one that had the actual voices of the original cast. Have you ever played that?
Nope, never.
Oh, it's
played
really
the
cool.
Ghostbusters game on the C64 back in the 80s.
That was also amazing, David Crane's work. But this game actually feels like a third movie because they got all the original cast back. It tells a continuing story. You play like a new hire who gets added, like a fifth Ghostbuster. But they released that game with slightly different design, same voices, but instead of trying to do photorealistic graphics, which they did for PS3 and Xbox 360, there was a version for the PlayStation 2 and the Wii that reimagined the characters in a more cartoony look. So that they could deal with the lower polygon counts. And it's one of many games around that time where the PS2 version and the Wii version are virtually identical graphically.
Yeah.
And it just shows you, and the Wii is already using a processor that's clocked at basically twice what the GameCube was clocked at.
So the Wii was definitely underpowered in that generation, but it did something completely different than the two other competitors that did, really.
The same thing with the Switch. The Switch the Switch is not a console. It's a handheld in that sense.
But still, for my money, and a lot of people, I think actually, it's the best console of that generation.
Well, yeah, unless of course you want to play GTA 5.
Yeah, but who wants?
Unless you want to play the newest Assassin's Creed games.
True.
Unless you want to play Call of Duty. Unless you want to play anything of that generation, except Nintendo titles.
True.
And that's
and lots and lots of indie titles.
Yeah. So if you're Sony and your competition is not people who want to play Pikmin or Smash Brothers, because they're not going to buy a PlayStation 2 if they want to play those games. But if they want to play GTA, well, the GTA games end up appearing on the Xbox. The Call of Duties end up appearing on the Xbox. The Soul Caliburs, well, they also show up on the GameCube, but, there's a lot of titles that are basically only going to appear on those two consoles. And so that's your competition.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Makes sense. But his whole idea of having to move up the PS3 launch, which is going to happen, I believe, in another 4 or 5 years from this point, is completely unfounded. As we said, GTA 3 is here. So all of this stuff that they're talking about is not going to make a lick of difference once GTA 3 shows up.
True.
Yeah.
So on to the next piece of news.
Yes.
Yamauchi establishes Fund Q.
Outgoing Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi, and I'm killing that one as well, has sold off 20 billion yen worth of his Nintendo holdings to establish Fund Q, which will act as an incubator for developers working on GameCube and Game Boy Advance games, and also help him avoid capital gains taxes. Can't underestimate the value of that. The first investments for the fund will be going to Square. Yeah, little independent studio Square.
Yes, tiny independent studios.
Yeah. Yamauchi would claim the money would help Square develop an innovative Final Fantasy game for the GameCube that would help them recover from the, quote, disappointment, end quote, that was FF Online because the Japanese game industry depends on Final Fantasy, but that the GameCube version would have to be unique. This would lead to Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles, which would be developed by the Game Designer Studios, that's the name of the company, a Square-owned shell company that would take Fund Q money to make the game with agreement of Sony as long as PS2 production wasn't impacted, since Sony now owns a big chunk of Square, as we reported last month.
Sounds like a fishy deal here.
There's a little bit of fishiness. What it really is the Japanese companies circling the wagons because they really are afraid of the Xbox. So we talked about this last month because Square was feeling the pinch because the Spirits Within the movie failed so miserably. And we're also getting reports this month that the CEO of the company, Hisashi Suzuki, has stepped down. And they have kind of been neglecting their product pipeline because they were going to be doing all these different movies. There's even some rumors that they had already been working on deals to do movie versions of other games that weren't even their properties. And because, it was going to be the Square Studios doing CGI movies from here on out. They were going to be Pixar or something.
Yeah.
And that has all gone bust. And we also talked about this a couple months ago, how Yamauchi, after the GBA started selling so wonderfully at first, and there's been a slump in those sales in Japan since the big launch, that, Square is not going to get games on the GBA because, we don't need them. Because he was still pissed off that Square, which basically made its fortunes on the NES, had dissed the N64 and gone to the PlayStation with Final Fantasy VII.
Yes.
And so he was not taking kindly to this, and this is why some of the comments that show up in the magazines from him is basically just like, Square is a shithole, but he's not his words, but that's basically how it comes across. But the Japanese gamers, for whatever reason, are really, really hooked on these Final Fantasy games. So we're going to make sure that the gamers get what the gamers want, but it has to be a unique Nintendo style product. It's very, very nose in the air attitude in his comments about all of this. But the reality is that very few developers are taking advantage of the ability to connect the GBA to the GameCube.
Yes.
And so anybody who takes FunQ money is going to have to develop a game that takes advantage of that connectivity.
Oh, really? I've never played a single game that does that, actually. I need to try that at some point.
There's really only a handful, and the main problem with it is that you would have to, it's usually something along the lines of, some strategic or inventory management on the Game Boy Advance screen while you're doing it. There may have even been a Madden that used it. I can't remember now, for choosing your plays. But it does require quite a bit of, additional hardware to, you can't just sit down and say, let's play the game, pick up a controller. Oh, no, first we got to plug in our Game Boy Advances and all that stuff. So, and Sony had already stepped in to basically bail out Square by buying a huge chunk of the company. That investment was to ensure that the Final Fantasy games keep coming out on the PlayStation. And that's why there won't be a main series Final Fantasy game for a Nintendo platform for a while, and instead they're going to continue to release those on Sony's platform. And that's why Sony agreed to this, as long as it didn't impact the production of games going to the PlayStation 2.
And Square is still going strong today, so they definitely kept them alive.
Well, they got gobbled up by Enix.
True.
So, I mean, they're going strong in the sense that they got gobbled up and their IP is going strong.
Yes.
But
lots of new Final Fantasy games in the works these days.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's an unbelievably valuable property, and that's what Yamauchi is already identifying back then. And I mean, the idea that Final Fantasy Online was a disappointment, it's still going. It's 20 years later, you can still play Final Fantasy Online. So not that much of a failure. It's just the Japanese industry, I don't think, was quite ready for the online gaming thing just yet.
Okay.
Not like the Koreans were, or even the US was.
So, in other news, Trip Hopkins bails out the 3DO.
Yes, after reporting a 50% drop in revenue, the 3DO company has issued a new batch of stock, which was almost entirely bought by company head and co-founder Trip Hopkins. Sorry. The additional $10 million plus raised in the sale will hopefully help the company balance its books after having cut costs dramatically in the last year.
Yeah, well, we're in 2002, so I guess 3DO doesn't have a lot of time left in it, does it?
Well, they gave up the console years before that.
Okay.
So they are purely a software company. Their main IP was the Army Men series that started out as strategy and then spun off into all sorts of other action games.
Yeah,
one of the things that they've done now to generate some funds to patch their hole was selling off the Army Men IP. So they no longer own those game rights. Okay. And they're not, they're going to lose steam, and nobody really knows what to do with them at this point. And ultimately, this injection of $10 million isn't really going to help the company. It hasn't really been able to find its footing as a software publisher after giving up the hardware business. and they're ultimately just going to be dissolved in March of 2003. So they have another year to go, but it's the turnaround is not going to be successful.
No.
Oh,
poor Tripp then. All of his money, $10 million.
Oh, please. Tripp founded EA. He $10 million for him is pocket change.
Probably.
He's going to do more companies after this and all sorts of stuff. Tripp is still to this day doing just fine.
But now he has one less yacht. Just consider that. Who will think of the shareholders? So BioWare cancels publishing deal with Interplay.
Yes, we talked in our November 2001 jump about how BioWare was suing Interplay over royalty payments. Well, they have finally ended the publishing deal with Interplay for their forthcoming D&D game, Neverwinter Nights, which will now be published by D&D rights holder Infogrames.
So Neverwinter Nights, remember that actually, back in the day. That was actually released by Infogrames?
Yeah, Infogrames ends up releasing that, and it's because Interplay just screwed up. They had overextended themselves a few years before this. They had already lost the Star Trek license they had put a lot of money into, and their third quarter 2001 earnings, those also get reported this month. They showed a drop in revenue of 87% year over year.
God.
Yeah. From 31.6 million to just 4.2 million. And it was basically due to a lack of new product in the pipeline. They had a lot of hopes set for Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and a game called Galleon. And we talked about this last year, early in the year, that they had made the decision to shift from being a primarily computer RPG publisher to a console game publisher. And they had been doing console stuff for a while, famously games like the early Blizzard titles, Lost Vikings and Rock and Roll Racing and stuff.
Yes.
But they had never quite found their footing in the console space, especially after Blizzard left. And so this was the idea. They did Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance and Fallout. I can't remember the name of it. It was basically using the same game engine as Dark Alliance, but in the Fallout setting. The name of the game is completely eluding me right now. Though Dark Alliance is going to do great, the Fallout game is not going to.
Yeah, for me, quintessential Interplay published games were those early Blizzard games. I mean, Lost Vikings and Blackthorn, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Rock and Roll Racing, of course, as well. But those first two, I loved those back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Blackthorn absolutely adored that game. And I'm going to be blasphemous here and say that I still consider that a better game than both Out of This World and Flashback. I said it.
You're wrong, of course, but it's a good game. It's a good game.
I'm sorry. You give me guy with dark sunglasses, a t-shirt, a shotgun, and orcs. What else do I need? And he can shoot the gun just by holding his hand, without even looking back. You can shoot the guy behind you.
Yeah, it's got one key for shooting forwards and one key for shooting backwards. It's brilliant. It's a great game. It's a great game.
And it's only there so you can have that really cool graphic of him shooting the shotgun backwards and the orc dropping.
Yes.
I'm sorry. That was worth the price of admission right there.
Brilliant game. I love that. And House of Dead, sorry. The Lost Vikings was brilliant as well.
Oh, yeah.
But Another World and Flashback, they're hard to top.
Yeah, Flashback for me almost inches it out. It just some of the later levels of Flashback didn't have the right balance for my taste. Those first few
I was just about to say that I finished Flashback on the Mega Drive, which was the original platform, and it's a brilliant game there. But it does get too hard later on. Actually, it's still enjoyable, but it does get too hard. And Blackthorn is actually better paced there.
Exactly. That's why I prefer it, because as a game it plays better. Obviously, it doesn't have jack for a story. The story is nonsensical. But the problem with
Flashback you're the prince
is,
and you need to save your people, Carl. I mean, that's important.
Exactly. And you were the lost prince or whatever, and you ended up becoming a biker. I love it.
What's not to love?
My only problem with Flashback was that in the later levels, it kind of forgot that it was an action game and tries to be an adventure game, but the engine isn't really designed for that, and the level layouts aren't really good at that. And it just became kind of annoying to rerunning all over the place and trying to figure out what am I even supposed to be doing here.
For me, that's definitely a case of I've got some heavy rose tinted spectacles on when I play that game, so I can't say anything objective about that.
Yeah, I played it in college. It was already way old. Played it on an emulator, the Genesis port.
Yes.
And it was great. And then suddenly it just the flow of the game just stopped, and I was like, oh, okay. What am I doing now? And I had to actually, I just pulled up a walkthrough to get through most of the city stuff, because it was just like, I don't even understand what I'm doing here. and I never had that problem with Blackthorn. I never had to pull up I used a lot of save states when I played it, but I never had to pull up anything. I could figure out what was going on. The level layouts were logical enough, and the progression of difficulty seemed fair.
I remember buying Flashback when it came out, but it was the DOS version. Funnily enough, it came on one HD and one DD floppy disk. But hey, I still have that here somewhere. But the real version to play, and the version that I finally finished at some point, was later when I got the Mega Drive version. So.
Do you never played it on the Amiga?
I did, but it's a lot better both on PC, if I recall correctly, and definitely better on the Mega Drive.
Yeah, especially the one-button joystick was was a nightmare to try to control it with.
Yes. But moving on, mate. Moving on. Sony introduces voice controls.
Sony has demonstrated Deca Voice, a cel-shaded detective game in a steampunkish version of 1920s Tokyo that uses voice commands to control aspects of the game. In addition to the voice controls, Sony's robot dog Aibo will react to events in the game as you play.
So didn't the Famicom actually have voice controls for some stuff? Because I seem to recall that the second... Not the first, but the second control in the Famicom had a microphone in it?
Yes.
Or is it the other way around? Yeah?
No, I can't remember. It was the first. It was probably the first Player 1 controller.
Yeah, could be.
But yeah, no, that had voice control. Now, it didn't really, as far as I understood it, I might be wrong on the technical side, it didn't actually really recognize voices. It could just do a couple of different tones.
Yeah.
So, you know, it wasn't a true voice recognition.
I wouldn't expect it to be.
Yeah.
By the 8-bit days.
and I've got video of this. Now, this game was obviously never localized and never made it out of Japan, but I have video showing how the game is played. It's an advertisement for the game, and so apparently when you're questioning people and stuff, you actually give instruction. And there's a dog companion in the game. So your character's always walking around with this dog next to him, and you could give commands to the dog similar to the way that you controlled the dog in Shadow Dancer, the old Sega arcade game.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you could tell the dog to go and attack the guy, and then that would allow you to walk by or whatever else. Now, the Aibo, the little dog, the way they showed it is like it's sitting on the ground, and it's perceiving what's going on the screen and recognizing some symbols, and will actually like wag its tail at certain points or bark and look at you. And it's like, oh man, talk about Sony cross-pollinating their products. Whether or not anybody actually had all the equipment to play this game properly, I have no idea. But yeah.
And it's like Rob the Robot for the PS2 instead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, Sony was really pushing the Aibo for a long time. I mean, I don't know how successful it was, but...
Never seen one in the real world, but I've read about it a lot back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. No, but it was, just as a side, it wasn't the only weird controller this month. A company called Thrustmaster, which is a great name when you think about it. They had their fighting arena, a pressure pad with sticks attached to it, vertical sticks that came up off the ground that you could beat. So you could hit these sticks, and that would be like hitting and kicking the characters on screen, in addition to moving on the pad. That's there for both the PS2 and the original PSX. And yeah, the reviews for it are just catastrophically bad. And there's another device called Game Track, which is a cross-platform motion control device similar to the Wii's motion control.
Okay.
So, and it's done by this company. It kind of went on this little mini deep dive on this because the guy who founded the company is actually still in the business today, but he's doing like high-end stuff. But he also had a whole bunch of little companies in between where they were making peripherals, third-party peripherals for consoles. And this was like his first one. So it basically works like the Wiimote. Movement system, so but without the potentiometer. So it was just measuring, motion relative to the little Wii bar.
Okay.
And
so the IR part of it. Yep.
Exactly. But it doesn't really go anywhere because it's a third-party peripheral that you can't. You'd have to make a game that supports it, Yeah.
So pairing it with the accelerometer data was definitely what the Wii got right.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Okay. So House of the Dead goes cel-shaded.
Sega is on a tear with a ton of games being announced or in development for every conceivable platform. One of the most anticipated, House of the Dead 3, had first screenshots shown, and it is using a slick cel-shaded vibe.
I've never seen House of the Dead 3, I think.
Oh, you have seen it. It just looks like all the other House of the Deads because they got cold feet and released it with traditional shading. And
that's why.
Cell shading. Yeah.
Okay.
When I first saw these screenshots, everybody who's heard this podcast for any period of time knows I love me my cell shading. I love it. I love it to death. As far as I'm concerned, every game should be cell-shaded. Get your Jet Set radios. Give me your Sly Coopers. Give me your Cell Damage. Give me your the Dreamcast port of Wacky Races. You give me cell shading, and I will be a happy camper till the cows come home. And these screenshots, a link to the screenshots in the show notes. Oh, they're so beautiful. They're so beautiful. I want this game to exist, and it doesn't. So, I just needed to mention this because it still hurts 20 years later. I'm still hurting from the fact that this game did not get.
So no reason to go into a panic, mate. But the IDOS causes a panic with a text message.
That's right. Nice transition. UK publisher Eidos has ruffled some feathers after sending out a mass text message telling people to, quote, please report to your local army recruitment center immediately for your second tour of duty, end quote. The text message continued with a promo for Commandos 2, but unfortunately some veterans who received the message got a bit of a shock, especially given the current state of the world. Eidos claimed the message had been written and planned many weeks before September 11th.
Oh yeah, that's a bit of bad timing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly when this message went out, I could not pinpoint. There's no mention of this on the wiki entry for Commandos 2, but given that it's in the January issues probably happened somewhere late September, early November.
Okay.
So yeah, this would have been, if you're a guy who had just done a tour of duty or something and you're being called up because you're still on the reserve list, that would freak you out.
Yes, I could definitely see that.
Yeah.
So on a lighter note, Commandos is the game that was kind of like Cannon Fodder, wasn't it? Like a continuation of Cannon Fodder.
It was from a Spanish studio. Obviously was using a bit more of a tactical side because you had different characters had different specialties.
Yeah.
And
so still in real time. It wasn't turn-based?
I don't believe. No, it wasn't. Although you might have been able. It's been so long. You might have been able to pause it and give each one of them different commands.
Okay.
Yeah, but they weren't, just all in one little group because they each had different specialties. So, you have one guy was setting explosives, another guy, distracting people, whatever the case may be. The problem with Commandos 2, and this came from a Spanish studio, and they must have been channeling the old Spanish game design ethos of the 80s. The Commandos 2 game is so unbelievably brutally hard to the point where it is quite literally unplayable to anybody but the most hardcore of nut jobs.
Okay.
And all the reviews said that as well. They were like, what the hell? And the best part is Commandos 1 was a PC-only title. This is the one that gets ported to console as well. So, it's a much bigger release. It's a much more expensive release. And it kind of falls flat. They do end up doing a Commandos 3, but it's a much more pared back game then.
Okay.
And the damage had already been done to the franchise.
Sounds like a bad idea to go really, really hard and then release on the console at the same point in time, because if I do recall correctly, Commandos 2 is definitely a mouse control game on the PC.
Yeah.
So there'd be a learning curve there as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, and remember, it's Commandos 2. Well, if you're a console gamer, you never heard of Commandos 1.
Nope, true.
So, you also have that problem with the name recognition of, okay, what the hell is this even?
Yeah.
And, yeah, it's just problematic. Now, speaking of problematic, and this is just a quick side note, there's also a story about a group in California, since we're talking about 9/11 and repercussions and all that. There's a group working on a Sims-like game about Al-Qaeda with the developer Michael Zida, I think is his pronunciation, Zyda, admitting that his first thought on hearing of the World Trade Center attack was, quote, how do we model this, end quote. And this guy, as far as I can tell, did not end up making their Sims version of Al-Qaeda, but he did become the director of America's Army, the game, that first-person shooter recruitment tool that they've been distributing for 20 years and just announced last month here in the year 2022 that they are shutting it down. Yeah.
So that sounds crazy to me. Not the America's Army stuff, but a Sims-like game about the Al-Qaeda?
About, the interactions of people, I guess, joining Al-Qaeda or training in Al-Qaeda or managing Al-Qaeda. I'm not quite sure. But, I mean, if you're going for some controversy in your game design, I mean, how do you...
You definitely get that.
have, little AI people that you have to now recruit in here and then convince to become suicide attackers.
Wow.
I mean, I guess there's a game in there, but
yeah,
it becomes
going over some boundaries that I'm not comfortable crossing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, granted, in the last episode, in the 100th episode, we did kind of talk about the controversial elements of cannon fodder, but
Yep.
So yeah, it's yeah. Okay, let's move on to less controversial things.
Yes, Amstrad is buying up Spectrum game rights.
Sir Sugar's Amstrad has been snatching up publishing rights to classic Sinclair Spectrum games. They have also teased, quote, an exciting new project due to launch in 2002, end quote. The excitement will be downloadable Spectrum games for their e-mailer, that's spelled with the A as the @ symbol, device, and all-in-one phone, text messaging, and email unit.
Okay. So more ways of playing the old ZX Spectrum classics, I guess.
Definitely. I mean, it's kind of cool. And just as a reminder for those not in the know, Amstrad bought up the Sinclair brands, the Spectrum brands, back in the 80s. The late 80s, when Sinclair basically blew the lot on his electric buggy thingamajig.
The C5.
Yeah, the C5. Such a dumb thing. Okay. What are we going to do? We're going to build a vehicle that has no roof, and we're going to put it at just the right height so you can take in all the exhaust from a truck. Go for it.
He was just there like 30 years too early, mate. I mean, now we're all driving around electric cars in a few years. So, yeah.
Yeah, except these cars will have roofs, and we won't be directly breathing in the exhaust of a truck.
True, and they'll probably be able to drive more than, what was it, about 30 kilometers an hour you could drive in those things?
Yeah, I mean,
I forget. Oh, yeah.
It's one of those things where unless you can get the battery tech working, just don't do it.
Yep.
But then again, hey, he used to sell kit computers that almost never work, so it's this'll work too just fine. I don't know. But yeah, this emailer device, there's links to it in the show notes. Interesting little piece of tech and very much a product of its time just before smartphones take off. To have this device on your desk that, I can send a quick email from my phone. It's just kind of cute and of the moment, but that you would also be able to download Sinclair Spectrum games is a little bit ahead of its time, which is really cool.
So is it something in the form factor of like the old PDAs, the Palm Pilots?
No. It's in the form factor of an actual phone, like one of those office phones with a bunch of buttons to connect. It's that with a screen and a full keyboard.
Okay, never seen that before.
Yeah, here, 1 second. There's if you check the links on the last link, believe or no, the second link has a picture of it.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and this wasn't the only device of its kind at the time. There were other devices that were doing similar things, and it had a keyboard that you could actually pull out. So it had a little miniature keyboard at the top, which I believe was for SMS text messages. But then it had another keyboard that you could pull out at the bottom, which was a full QWERTY.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely haven't seen any of those before.
Talking about ways of accessing the internet.
Yeah. We were actually just talking about the Palm Pilot, and Pogo is bringing the internet to the palm of your hand.
Pogo Technologies out of the UK is bringing the internet to the palm of your hand with the Pogo, a hybrid phone, web browser, emailer, PDA, and MP3 player. The device will launch at £300 with its full color display using a 3.8-inch front-lit touchscreen. It will be supported by a server-based compression service that will reduce requested websites to a manageable size for the still somewhat slow data connections of existing cell phone networks.
Oh man, I remember those days where there would actually be, like the Opera browser would have a server-side compression service to compress and compress images and even the text to make the websites load a tiny bit faster on your low-powered devices or a cell phone network, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And this one, especially the device looks kind of weird. It's got like the screen and then it's got like on each corner a little bulb sticking out. One of them is to hold the stylus, which you didn't really need because it was a touch screen, but they still included it. Another one was the antenna, and another one was like a battery. I have no idea anymore, but weird looking little device, and unfortunately it's going to sell so poorly that by December of 2002 they're going to shut down the servers that provide the websites, which essentially also kills the devices themselves.
So the problem with these devices, hey, actually, I'm just looking at it on Wikipedia. It is Opera Mini, the browser that was there. So they did have that technology for compressing server side. But the problem with those devices were actually the GSM-based mobile phone in there. So the best connectivity you get would be GPRS. And if I recall correctly, it was something like 9,600 baud.
Ooh.
That horribly, horribly slow. At least the devices I had in hand back in those days were something like that. And that was just almost unusable.
Yeah.
But using data compression, of course, the effective GSM speeds would be maybe 50 kilobits per second, which is acceptable back in those days. But yeah.
And these are also the days before you had Wi-Fi enabled home.
Oh yeah, way before that.
So yeah, it's too early for this device. A couple more years, and this would have been a good idea. ultimately they do have a next generation version of the hardware ready to go. I'm not quite sure if they actually launch it or not, but the company is going to go broke and they're just going to sell everything off, and other companies are going to take the assets and the patents and do other things with them.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard about the Pogo myself.
Yeah, I remember reading about it at the time very briefly, but because it was a UK exclusive thing, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, and we were all about Palm Pilots here in Denmark, it seems.
Oh,
and then
nice.
in those days, early 2000s, the first Windows CE-based stuff would start to show up as well, I think.
Yeah, I remember seeing that in a store. I'd walked into a tech store because I needed to buy a copy of Escape from Monkey Island. And that was probably 2002. Maybe 2003, but it was probably 2002. And I remember the Windows CE devices sitting there on display and trying to check them out and trying to figure out just how compatible they would actually be with Windows files and stuff.
They were horrible devices.
Oh yeah. Slow as molasses.
Yes. So, pervasive gaming hits mobile phones.
It's Alive, a Swedish developer, has introduced what may be the first true location-based game, which they are calling a pervasive game. Each player takes on the role of a combat robot and gets messages on their phone whenever they get near another player or enter an area or building of interest. Upgrades to weapons can be earned or bought through kills or real-world money running over your cell phone bill. Bot Fighters is their first title. They will develop several more over the coming years, including a virtual soap opera called Superfly.
So mobile games these days, of course, with the likes of Pokemon and Pikmin Bloom and whatever the kids are playing these days, they are location based. A lot of them are.
Yeah.
But this sounds like good fun because I love the part about the proximity of other players being a part of this game. I mean, I wonder. I'm not really into mobile gaming, but I wonder if there's lots and lots of games on the iPhones and Android phones today that use the GPS position to do stuff like this, because it sounds like it could be quite interesting.
Well, that's the thing. Obviously Pokemon Go is using underlying tech that's been used in previous games from the same developer. There's a game, blanking on the name of it right now, where everybody is trying to find these crystals and all this stuff. A buddy of mine used to play it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's using exactly the same map data. It's the same company that developed Pokemon Go. That was their first big game. And the idea, though, with this, because these are cell phones without GPS, from the descriptions, and it's all running over SMS, it's not an installed program on the phone. So they're just sending you these constant text messages.
Yep.
And they're like, there is somebody within, 200 yards of you or something. So I'm guessing that they're using the cell phone tower positions. Yep. That's how they're controlling this. And so as soon as somebody pings off the same cell phone tower, then you get a message. And there's actually screenshots. Put links to the old archived versions of their website and stuff in the show notes. But you would log on to the website and, you could buy new equipment for your robot. So you could shoot maybe a little bit faster or a little bit farther than the other guy or get more shots off per second. And then so you would see somebody is nearby and then you would shoot. And then the server would be taking those SMS messages and doing an RPG style calculation of, how much armor does the other guy have, and then send back the results as to whether or not you managed to destroy the other guy or not. And
so it sounds like good fun, but at the same time, it sounds like playing chess over email, doesn't it?
Chess, but it's in real time, and the other guy could also be shooting at you. And people are reporting also about how this thing never turns off. So you're getting these text messages at any time of the day whenever somebody decides to start shooting at you. And this is kind of why they're calling it pervasive. It's always there. And the game never makes it to, for example, the United States or Germany, but they do they do end up rolling it out in the countries they list are China, Russia, a bunch of these countries. And it's got to have something to do with the willingness of the cell phone providers to provide the ping data from the cell phone towers.
Yep.
But the idea that they did a game called Superfly, where you're just like outfitting your character and stuff, it just seems so weird and awkward.
So I'm thinking these days, because of privacy concerns, that would be a no-go. You couldn't create a game using your cell phone tower information like that.
They definitely would not hand out that kind of data to a gaming company. But this is why you bypass it with the GPS.
Yeah, exactly. You need to make the game itself tell you where you are with the GPS instead.
Exactly. And the GPS is then completely independent from anything else. So in theory, you're getting even better data than before. It's just the cell phone company is not complicit in that data transfer.
True.
Yeah. Now, just as a side, this company is going to get sold in 2007 to a company called Digiment, and one of the founders of this, it's a live company. He's still in the business today. He's another one of these people I've sent a request for an interview to, and hopefully we'll hear back from.
Sounds exciting.
It would be cool, but he's still active in the business, so likelihood of getting the interview is virtually. Oh well.
So next piece of news is that the Segway revolutionizes human transport.
Well, it at least made human transport really funny looking. This is not directly gaming related, but it's kind of goes with this idea that there's a lot of new technologies coming out right now that are kind of, everybody's feeling like there's something new in the air with cell phones and this and that. So Segway was one of them. I had to throw it in. So Segways were going to make everything cooler and better, but we're just a stepping stone to the hoverboard, which was, Okay, moving on.
Bleem is dead.
The Bleem website has been taken down, and a sole image of a mournful Sonic the Hedgehog standing over a tombstone marking Bleem's life from April 1999 to November of 2001 remains. While they won their court battles against Sony, the financial toll ultimately was too much for the company to bear.
Yeah, and you are one of the few users of Bleem, aren't you?
I was a user of Bleem. Yes, I enjoyed Bleem. I thought it was really, really cool. As somebody who was fiercely PC, but there were so many good games I wanted to play, like Metal Gear Solid. It was an amazing piece of kit, so I could go out and buy these other games without having to hook up a TV and hook up a PlayStation. And the games looked awesome. They looked better than on the PlayStation.
Yep.
But ultimately, commercial emulation was never really going to be a viable option.
No. But these days we have emulation of everything, and it looks brilliant. So
this is true.
We win in the end anyway, Carl.
We do. We are the winners.
We are indeed. So EA.com sees massive layoffs.
EA saw losses of over $30 million in the last quarter, in no small part due to its online venture EA.com. The company, which is listed as an independent tracking stock, will see 200 to 260 layoffs in an attempt to bring it back to viability.
Yeah, so EA, why is EA losing money these days?
Okay, EA.com was this attempt by EA to create a hub website for all of their online offerings and to create a single subscription service that would allow you to use the online features of all of their games that had online features. So, for example, if you paid for the monthly EA.com subscription, you would be able to play the online version of Sims. Okay. You'd be able to play the online version of Detroit City. You'd be able to play the online version of their sports games.
So it sounds pretty much like the many, many services we have today.
Yes. The only problem was that there was very, very little cross-pollination between the titles. So you still had to buy the game separately. This was just, the monthly fee on top of buying the packaged good. And the problem was that I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it wasn't just, $5 a month or something. It was something like 10, 15.
Okay.
And that was like way too much for the person who just wanted to go online with their Sims game or just wanted to play their Detroit game. And the proposition that, well, if you do this, you can also play all these other games. Well, if you're not interested in all the other games, and there weren't that many either, didn't do much good for you. And they also started buying up a few smaller titles, more casual games that you could also play on their website. But at this point, casual games, especially Flash-based games, are so omnipresent on so many websites for free that what EA is offering is not enough added value.
Yeah, Flash was definitely taking off here in the early 2000s.
Oh, definitely. And I believe even the Pogo could run Flash, since we're talking about that. If you want to hear more about the history of EA.com, check out my interview with Gordon Walton, because he was in the thick of it at the time, and he actually goes into quite a bit of detail about what was wrong with this strategy. So link in the show notes below.
Yeah, interesting. So SNK ceases operations.
The makers of the Neo Geo have finally ceased all operations and closed their doors. Their bankruptcy filing back in April apparently did not do enough to right their ship.
That's too bad. I mean, I love the Neo Geo, and I love all that SNK logo. Just means so much to me. Yeah,
and SNK. I mean, we've just recently been talking about the launch of the Neo Geo on the 30-year jumps.
Yeah,
and it's really kind of sad to see what happened to the company. Unfortunately, the decline of the arcade, the fact that they never managed to really get a sequel hardware off the ground. Yep. There was, of course, the Neo Geo CD, which was way too slow for
a single-speed CD-ROM.
A single-speed CD-ROM for a sprite-heavy system.
Yep.
I mean, you might have been able to pull that off if you were doing a lot of polygonal stuff, but with the massive amount of sprite data that you're dealing with and the fact that you're going to have to pause every time you need to load, it just destroyed a lot of the feeling and rhythm of the games. And
especially seeing as these games were arcade games. So you're used to these being loaded from the direct ROM. So it would be quick. It would be instantaneous almost. It just wouldn't work. You wouldn't want to stand there and wait for, many seconds between a level of Metal Slug, for example. So.
Yeah. Now, it did make a lot of the Neo Geo kart games, which were very expensive, much more affordable, because you just had to press them onto a CD. And there were a few games that were specific to that system, like there was a Samurai Showdown RPG.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was just too little too late. And then, of course, they had their own 3D hardware, but it was underpowered in comparison with Sega and Namco's offerings, and at the same time didn't have the advantage that the original Neo Geo had in the arcades, which was, put 4 games in the system and everything's cool.
Yeah, that's true. It's too bad because these guys, if they could have done something like the Neo Geo, the AES system, affordable, it would have been a game changer back in the day. But for those of us following the scene back in the day, I didn't know anybody who could afford an AES, let alone the games for the AES. But
they were astronomical.
Yeah, but the games were so far ahead of what you could get at home on other consoles, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, and this is where, I remember going into Software Etc. It was a games shop in the States, and they had the Neo Geo console up on the shelf. And if you looked at the games that were available for it, especially those first 2 years, you're looking at games like POW. You're looking at games like, I can't remember, there was a baseball title they had, like All-Star Baseball or something. You're looking at, was it not Magic Sword. The one where you're walking around as a mage beating stuff up.
Yeah.
There were not good games. These were games that you might have played for 5 minutes in the arcade, but you didn't want to take that home, especially not for $150. The problem with the Neo
Geo have games like NAM 75, mate. Brilliant game.
NAM 75 is a fun game, but if you're looking at NAM 75, sorry, that's the one I meant, not POW. That POW wasn't an SNK game. Is it that much better than Cabal?
Well, maybe,
not really.
Maybe not. Not sure.
No, it's not. And there were somewhat decent home ports of Cabal already on the 8-bit systems. It's by the time these games are coming out, you're competing against the F-Zeros of this world. You're competing against the Super Mario Worlds of this world. You're competing against Sonic. As far as home games are concerned, they may have had more colors. They may have been slightly more impressive in the number of sprites on the screen, but they weren't more impressive as far as the games. By the time the really top-line Neo Geo games come out, we're talking your Samurai Showdown. We're talking your Art of Fighting, maybe not so much, but King of Fighters. You're talking your Metal Slugs, your Puzzle Bobbles, and so forth. By the time those games show up, you're already in year 2 or 3 of the Super Nintendo. You're in year 4 and 5 of the Genesis.
But this is leagues ahead of the Super Nintendo or the Genesis.
Those are leagues ahead on a technical level.
Yeah.
But by then, you're already sort of, those are really great games. They're super fun. If you can afford them, that's great. But by then, the retailers had lost confidence in the platform.
Yeah.
You can't ask the retailers to keep this thing on the shelf for 3 years waiting for the good games to show up.
And it's far too expensive. So I remember games like Thrash Rally. It was one of the first games I got from Neo Geo. Brilliant game that was released on launch. At least I think it was released on launch for the Neo Geo as well.
Thrash Rally? No.
I think it's a 91 game, I'm sure. There's Fatal Fury, there's NAM 1975. There are Magician Lord, and of course I think Baseball Stars was the one you were talking about as well. So there were some great games
in
there.
91. Thrash Rally is in 91.
Yeah.
Let's see.
But Neo Geo was released in 91, wasn't it?
No, 1990.
But that would be the Japanese release, right?
I believe that's the Japanese release, yeah.
Okay.
But
you might be right.
Even Thrash Rally, even though it's a fun game, it's not that far ahead of what's on the Sega Genesis at this point.
Oh yes.
From a gameplay standpoint.
Go back and play Thrash Rally with those huge sprites just whizzing through that environment. That was
of course.
Something you'd never get on the consoles. Not even the latest Genesis games or SNES games wouldn't be able to compete with that. The Neo Geo was a completely different class, but it was far too expensive. Far too expensive.
The simplest game on there was going to put you back $150 or more.
The simplest game was going to cost you more than the console of the competitors.
Not quite, but
almost
close.
Yeah.
And the problem is that there's just no price, the value for your money. And I think had they had a much stronger lineup that first year or two, they probably would have done better at retail. But because that first year or two, because Turbo Graphics is selling the CD add-on for $400.
Yeah.
Just the CD add-on. There was a market for hardware on that level. You just had to have the right software to support it. Yeah. And what Neo Geo did not have was console games. They had arcade games.
Yes.
Which played differently than a console game. And here I'm going to go back to my point. If you compare House of the Dead 2 with House of the Dead Overkill, Overkill is designed to be played at home. It's a much longer game. The pacing of the game is different. The complexity of the cutscenes is a whole different caliber because you're going to be sitting and watching and playing it at home. Whereas if you do a complex cutscene with a lot of dialogue in the arcade, nobody's going to hear it. Nobody's going to understand what's going on. And
that's true. The New Geo was definitely the arcade experience at home.
Exactly. But the problem is the arcade experience is usually something that you're experiencing for 2 to 3 minutes at a time.
Yes.
And the moment you sit down and you're like, okay, now we're going to play for 4 hours, that's when it starts getting kind of dull.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. So moving on, next gen is no more.
This one hits hard. The Edge's sister publication, Next Gen, releases its final issue. After almost 7 years in publication, the magazine has closed its doors. The numbers just weren't there to support it anymore.
So I feel you have some history with this magazine.
Yeah, I do. The first issue of it came out right around the time I moved back to the States.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just finding my footing, and this magazine came out. It was, I remember the first issue had Virtua Fighter on the cover because they were previewing the new consoles, the PlayStation, the Saturn were coming out. And it was a magazine that felt, it had a more mature tone. Most of the U.S. magazines at the time, actually all of them, were very much targeting the teenager crowd. And here was a magazine that actually talked about, earnings reports in addition to, these are the new games, and talking about the technology behind game development and tools and stuff. It was basically the Americanized version of the Edge magazine. And it was not quite as hardcore as the Edge, but it was close enough. It was more mature than anything I'd ever seen. I immediately gravitated towards it. I didn't buy it regularly the first year or two, but after that I was a monthly subscriber all the way until the end. Mm. And the last issue gave no indication that it was coming to an end. The only thing that you might have been able to hint at was the previous issue. The editor who had been there for quite a while, the head editor left. A new editor comes in for this last issue. And like I said, no indication in there. They even give a preview that the next issue's main feature was going to be video games as art. And then there just never was another issue.
Well, some things end and other things get a new lease on life because Thalamus is back.
Thalamus, the games publishing arm of magazine publisher Newsfield, famous for C64 titles such as Delta and Creatures, has been reformed by a group of former employees and C64 games journalists and game designer Andy Roberts. They will focus on GBA and GBC titles.
And I don't know if you know this, but they're actually back again.
That's true. They are back again. Right now, are they publishing new games or just republishing the old ones?
They're publishing new games as well. I'm sure that Thalamus is behind Millie and Molly being released on the Switch, for example. So Millie and Molly being the I'm blanking on his name right now. Charlton Handley? Sorry, mate.
Yeah, I don't know his name either.
It's a C64 game from a very famous C64 developer. And it's brilliant. It's a puzzle platformer game.
I know. I've played it. It's really good.
Yeah. And it's just got a Switch release backed by or published by Thalamus, I'm sure.
Oh, cool. Using C64 emulation or a reprogram for the Switch?
I'm actually not sure, mate. I haven't played it myself. I played the C64 version. I have that in his. He's called Charlton Handley, and he did the Run and Gun game as well. It's called Run and Gun. And
yeah.
You're controlling two characters, Run and Gun, and then they have different, abilities, and it's still kind of like an action puzzle platformer. He's doing some brilliant C64 games these days. But Thalamus is definitely back as a publisher there.
Cool. Yeah, and at this point, like I said, they did GBA and GBC games. I'm not quite sure how they got listed because I couldn't really find a listing for this version of Thalamus on Moby Games, but I did look up the LinkedIn profile of Andy Roberts, and on that he says that they released a variety of titles, but it doesn't go into specifics on which ones. Yeah, so...
Just looking up, Thalamus did, back in the day, they did Hunter's Moon as well. That's been re-released recently as well.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, didn't they also do Mayhem in Monsterland? Or was that somebody else?
I think that's Thalamus, yes.
Yeah. They stuck with it until the bitter end.
Yes, as did we.
True.
So for the final piece of news for today is Scott McCloud foreshadows the metaverse.
The most annoying attempt by social media companies to stay relevant in the year 2022, the metaverse, is foreshadowed by Scott McCloud's one-page comic in this month's Computer Gaming World, in which he speculates about the potential of true full-body force feedback and input to provide full immersion. He only forgot that if you aren't a ninja warrior in the real world, you'll be playing as a doofy cartoon version of yourself if you have a really kick bad guys in the face.
Sounds like you've been wanting to read the Ready Player One or something like that.
Not really, no. I mean, the Scott McCloud comics here in Computer Gaming World, we talked about this last month or the month before when they started, are very interesting insights into the ideas of gaming as a medium for storytelling and whatnot. And he really does go off on this idea of, what kind of story can you tell if the person is, actually performing the actions.
Yeah.
But he totally misses the point that if you actually had to perform these actions, it wouldn't last very long. I mean...
That'd be quite strenuous.
More than quite strenuous. It would be freaking insane, okay?
Yes.
Think about it. There's a reason why in movies, everybody's like, Schwarzenegger mows down 500 people in this movie. And when you actually count it, it's like he mows down 30 people in 2 hours. In a video game, literally he would mow down 30 people in 5 minutes.
Yep.
Games are insane in that regard. And don't even get me started on how Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition and 5th edition and so forth have desperately tried to be more video game like by letting you just kill shit en masse. Sorry, I'm still a 2E and 3E player when you actually had to earn your kills. No,
yes.
Damn whippersnappers. Okay. But so it's kind of weird that this idea of the metaverse is now finally coming around again, and everybody thinks that they can ride the coattails of this concept of being in the system, when the reality is we go into game virtual worlds to do stuff that we couldn't do here, and the only way to do that is to not actually have to do it. Instead, we'd press a button and suddenly we're kicking, as opposed to actually lifting our leg and realizing, I don't stretch that far. So, okay.
True. Very true. Depends on, of course, what you want to use the metaverse for. If you want to use it for gaming, yes, you'll hit your limitations quite quickly, I guess. But if you want to use it to, strengthen your remote work relations in some way, I can still see some merits there. But I'm looking forward to seeing what they actually do with it.
I am going to chalk it up completely and utterly to, we don't know how to prevent our stock price from going down, so we're going to invent something. Enron did the same exact thing right before they went bust.
Yeah.
Do you know the story of the Enron Corporation?
No, tell me.
Okay, Enron, biggest failure in U.S. history, economic failure up until that point. There's a great movie about it called Enron, The Smartest Guys in the Room. I highly recommend checking it out. And then after you're done watching the documentary, there's a great mockumentary called Memron, which is also amazing. But they were a trading platform for energy.
Yeah.
So you might remember California was having this huge problem with rolling blackouts where power would just drop off in certain areas for certain amounts of time. That was actually the crisis that led to Schwarzenegger getting elected in a special election. Well, that was all orchestrated by people inside of Enron trying to boost the numbers because they would get a percentage off of each sale. So if the prices were higher, they would get more money. They were orchestrating these things. And amongst other things, they were never producing enough money to actually justify their extremely high valuation. And so then they started coming up with more and more outlandish schemes for future projects, new types of trading platforms that they were going to establish, and they were using accounting tricks to say, well, this thing is going to be worth $5 billion in 3 years, so we're going to mark down on our books that we have $5 billion worth of profits today already, even though the thing doesn't exist yet. And when, 2 years later, when it's like, well, where are the potential profits from that $5 billion? Oh, don't worry about that. Here's one that's worth $10 billion. And one of the last ones they had was they were going to open up a digital marketplace so we could electronically trade internet bandwidth, because all these office buildings have internet bandwidth that they're not using at night, and so they can just put that bandwidth on the market, and then other people can use their bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
And
how did that work out?
You are the IT person. Now explain to me how the bandwidth of my office computer is going to be used by somebody in another city at night in their home when I'm not there.
Yeah, that baffles me. I'm not really sure.
It doesn't make...
Especially, I don't know how you do that in a secure manner.
It's impossible. It's physically impossible.
Yeah.
And I remember watching this guy from Enron on CNBC on the financial news explaining this, and all the talking heads on the TV going, well, that sounds perfectly reasonable. And I look at my dad going, that is physically impossible. It doesn't work. You'd have to have the person there to access the server. I mean, how am I going to get high speed at home when all I have is a 64K modem? It doesn't do me any good that this guy's got a T1 line in an office unless they're going to let me into the office in the middle of the night.
It's by magic, mate. By magic.
Yeah. And it was one of these cockamamie ideas. And that's what the metaverse is, as far as I'm concerned, when Facebook talks about it. It is, we are no longer really relevant. If the government wasn't increasing the money supply the same way it is doing now, or if they finally decide to shut us down because we're destroying democracy, we need to have a new idea. We've got Bupkis, and this idea will never actually work, but it's going to buy us another couple of years of good publicity until people realize that it's not going to work. So this is what I have chalked the metaverse up to.
Okay.
And that's just
fair enough.
Maybe being cynical, but nobody's going to spend 3 hours with fucking goggles on and headphones to chat to a cartoon version of their coworker about their dogs not being housebroken or something to increase the relationships at the office. That's not going to happen. There's going to be you're going to have a WhatsApp group or something, and that's it. Sorry.
Could be. I may be proving you wrong in a year or two, because I'm actually just now, next week, going to the launch of a research project that's actually looking into using AR and VR for kind of strengthening the working relationship of working partners that are geographically apart. So yeah, I might be proving you wrong. Let's see.
I will be fascinated to hear the results, because that's the kind of thing that should have been done before they announced that this was their new business model.
Yes, exactly. Exactly, mate.
Oh no, dude, that sounds fascinating. How long is the experiment supposed to run?
For the next 2 years, I think. We are in my company mostly there as the practical guys. I mean, we know about developing stuff for AR and VR, and the researchers know that they've got a lot of prototypes and stuff they want to have built, and then we'll help them with that and actually testing stuff out in the real world. So it's a huge project. It's called Rework, as we're reimagining the work environment, and just starting up next week.
Sweet. And so you got a whole VR setup and everything ready to go?
Oh yeah. VR and AR setups. This is probably a better case for AR than VR, really. But we've got stuff like the HoloLens and other kinds of AR setups ready. So yeah.
I was about to say, I mean, the VR and the AR are two separate pieces of hardware, right?
Yes, they are very much. VR it's hard to use in a work setting really because you're completely engulfed in this virtual world, whereas AR is something that we are already now deploying in real world settings out there on factory floors and other places, because that kind of just like augmenting your reality, of course, as it says.
Yeah, and that makes a lot more sense.
Yes, indeed. But still today, if you want to go the glasses route of AR, it's so much more expensive than the VR solutions, because stuff like Google Glass, or no, not Google Glass, the Microsoft, the HoloLens, for example, is still crazy expensive.
How much are you looking at there?
I forget what it is right now, but I want to say if you put it in US money, $1,200-$1,300.
Yeah,
like
that's
I forget right now what the price is.
I mean, the price will come down, but there you're looking at least a 3 to 4 year period before the prices come down to a somewhat reasonable sum.
Yeah, definitely. And they are wearable, but that's the best way to describe them. Really, they are too heavy. There are some Chinese stuff on the market right now that's only about 400 or 500 quid, I think. That's usable as well, Android based, but yeah, we're still a few years along down the line before it's actually feasible to use.
Cool. Well, dude, you're going to have to keep us abreast of how your experiment is running from time to time, just so we know where you're at with it.
Will do.
Awesome. Okay, that brings us to the end of the episode. Mads,
yes.
Your last official duty. What is the word of the episode?
So I was actually going to go with typing, but I think metaverse is of course the right word here, because you really dislike it. So metaverse is what I'm going to go with.
I don't say I dislike it. I just think at this point it's more of a stock gimmick than a reality. But
yes,
we'll see.
It's the new version of Second Life, isn't it?
Oh, come on. So, a new version of Second Life. The problem is they're trying to sell it as you actually do something productive in it. And Second Life, the whole purpose of Second Life was not to do anything productive.
Yeah,
but,
well, they were trying to sell them like office spaces and shops and stuff like that in Second Life. I remember. I had a friend back then who had a T-shirt made that said "Get a First Life" instead.
All I have to say is, why aren't we playing Habitat? Come on.
True.
The server's up and running again. You can jump back on and play Habitat. Have you tried that?
I have just briefly tried it maybe a year ago, I think. The old classic Lucasfilm games, C64 game. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's painful. It's brilliant, but at the same time, it's painful to play nowadays.
But it's so brilliant that they did that so many years ago, mate. That is crazy old. So.
Yeah. All the props in the world.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Mads, thank you as always for coming on, helping out, especially this extremely long episode.
Thanks for having me.
And everybody out there, remember, check out the links, check out Mad shows, and we will see you guys next time.
See ya.